to Victoria Rumble Room, an island show that likes to take a swing at some of the big issues, like local, provincial, national, you name it. I'm Robin Adair, and swinging all the way down from his Saanich lair is my co-host with the most, the Croatian sensation himself, John Treleaven. And Johnny, new developments regarding Canada's international relations in the Middle East, and it doesn't look good for Canada. We don't come across that well. It's funny, though, how it seems like Canadian politicians and politicians in general are more interested in what's going on in the Middle East these days, and rather than what's going on right at home. All our problems locally, the crime, unaffordability, the doctor shortage, all these things, even climate change. It seems like, oh, let's put that on the side burners and let's worry about what's going on in the Middle East. I would say these are crazy times.
Crazy, not understandable. Let's look at what's happened in Ottawa. I don't get it. I mean, so much stuff is happening here. So why don't we try to pass a bill that deals with something in some part of the world? In Ottawa, the NDP tabled a motion for Canada to officially recognize Palestine as a nation state. Right? That's a priority for us. This all ended up getting watered down because the Liberals were split, the Conservatives were totally opposed. NDP members, some dressed with Arab scarves, all voted for this new compromise motion that basically matched the old position that calls for Israel and Palestine to find peace and hold sovereignty as two states. So, a safe conclusion for the Trudeau government, but it looked shaky. In international relationship terms, that looks weak.
I mean, it doesn't really matter what Canada says. It's not going to affect what happens in the Middle East. It's all for local edification, how voters feel, how Muslim voters in Canada feel, how, of course, Jewish supporters and Jewish people feel, and a lot of them feel embattled these days. A lot is at stake right now in that regard when we're a year away from an election, and Liberal members in particular have felt very divided, some of them very threatened by all of this. And, it's a situation where, yes, Palestine should become a nation, but this does not preclude Israel still remaining a nation itself and an ally of Canada. And, here's a passionate address now from a Liberal MP from Montreal who's very upset about this.
And essentially, well, I appreciate my colleagues in the NDP. This motion, as some other colleagues have said, rewards Hamas. We, for generations in Canada, under successive Liberal and Conservative governments, have said that the way to recognize a Palestinian state, which we all want, living in peace side by side with Israel and in dignity and offering dignity to both peoples, should come when the two states, the two parties, negotiate their borders and the Palestinians elect a government to govern that territory. Hamas launched the deadliest attack on Israel, the deadliest pogrom against Jews since the Holocaust, and we're changing our foreign policy to reward Hamas and say, good for you, terrorists. You attacked a sovereign state, killed lots of people, including babies and women and everyone else, and raped and pillaged and brought people back as hostages who have now been there for almost 5 months. And yeah, let's recognize that state that we've never recognized before.
And Hamas continues its protracted conflict with Israel. Yes, Israel is raining down terror and weapons, and people in the middle are suffering. It is terrible. War is terrible. But the Hamas are using people as human shields in hospitals and schools. And I don't think this shows very strong leadership at all. And in my opinion, and John, we've expressed this before, what needs to happen is for both sides to set their weapons down. It needs to be followed by negotiations, a two-state solution, recognition of both states, and the Muslim community really needs to promise to keep the peace. No more people walking into Israel loaded up with human bombs, human explosions. It's one of the things that has always been a terrible, terrible thorn in any hope of a peaceful solution. And conversely, Israel needs to back off. They need to move out of these establishments, these colonist institutions on the West Bank. It should never have happened. These settler communities need to be removed. And then perhaps there can be peace in Canada. The rest of the Western world can move in with real aid, and that can become a much happier situation. And then we'll move on to the next crisis.
In the meantime, the marches and angry rhetoric continues on the streets of Canada. Much of this coming from pro-Palestine supporters, much of it flowing out of our universities, Robin. We had another pro-Israel gathering recently at the legislature, and it was really no surprise that anti-Israeli activists also showed up. The good news that there was plenty of police officers on hand, keeping the two sides far apart. But this did not stop a lot of the simmering anger as one pro-Palestine Palestinian started shouting at the Jewish gathering, yelling, can you believe this? Yelling, Hitler was right. Just terrible.
It is terrible. And I know that they were also chanting things about the Victoria police, calling them the KKK.
Oh, come on. This violence in Gaza and on our streets has to end, Robin. Crazy.
Well, John, let's shift. Let's shift to something else.
So, please.
It doesn't involve the Middle East. It doesn't involve that terrible level of violence, but it still is drawing lots of anger locally, and that is Victoria Councillors voting themselves a 25% pay increase, if you can believe it. And Marianne Alto, the mayor of Victoria, profoundly opposed this raise. The council voted 5-3 to give themselves an increase. They now make over $65,000 a year. This all for a part-time job. It's supposed to be public service. But Councillor Jeremy Caradonna claims they work full-time. That's a full-time job now, city council at City Hall. And he does mention that, he's got a lot of support because they did a study across Canada that showed that they are actually falling behind some of the big cities in other parts of Canada. And there's been a lot of reaction to all of this. Now, here's an image that was posted on social media by former councillor Stephen Andrew. Council members who voted for a big payday were Thompson, Layton, Kim, Caradonna, and Matt Dell. And sometimes this has been described by detractors, of course, as the group of five. Others are expressing their feelings about this cash grab as well. Steve Orchardon, the former MLA, wrote recently in the Times Colonist, every candidate clearly knew the stipend to be received and the time obligations required. These woe is me arguments don't cut it. If you find that holding elected office has become too costly to your family, the correct action is to resign. And Steve Orchardon wraps up his comments by saying this is blatant greed, and they should be ashamed.
Absolutely, they should be ashamed. And the Grumpy Taxpayers chimed in. The Grumpies of Greater Victoria also got in their 2 cents, probably 2 cents too much, by saying comparison to council pay in other cities is not fair. So, for example, in Victoria, the councillors top off their salaries by serving on other regional boards and committees like the CRD. Sure, this means extra hours, but it also means a bigger paycheck. We haven't even talked about the benefits part. Grumpy taxpayers spell it out. Apples need to be compared to apples, not kumquats.
Yeah, John, those grumpy taxpayers have been very busy over this last little while. Lots and lots of things said about tax increases and pay increases and too much governance on the South Island. Those are always big themes. And to drive their point home, they have released Your Survival Guide to Local Government, and it's written up as a quiz. We wanted to hear a bit more about that, so we asked John Treleaven all about it. Let's zoom in. And now joining us again in the Victoria Rumble Room, a regular guest on the show from the Grumpy Taxpayers of Greater Victoria, John Treleaven. John, it's always sort of bad news why you're here, but it's always great to have you on the show.
Well, thank you very much. And someday, hopefully, we'll bring good news to both you and John.
Well, at least this news is something that has a bit of a sense of humor to it. You've got a new survival guide that you've released. And lots of folks are distressed about paying their civic taxes right now. And that's at the best of times. Some of the folks in Langford, I think, are out of their minds about how much they're having to pay. So do you think that there's going to be a lot of laughs about your survival guide?
Well, there will be some laughs. There's already been some. But when people are made to laugh about, I don't know, a public policy issue, it makes them think about it. You can write a treatise. You can have a learned professor come up with 10 options. But when they look at the absurdity of a city of 450,000 people with 100 elected representatives, at first it's funny. And then the taxpayer says, well, wait a minute, who's paying for all that?
Why don't you and I get into it? Because these are great questions or statements. You have 14 survival questions for 14 municipalities and the CRD on the South Island. I think my favorite is question number 2. Let me just relate to you. The purposes of a municipality are A, suing big oil for climate change, B, providing good government for its community, or C, building two-way bicycle paths on one-way streets. Of course, good government is the correct answer, but it would seem that cities like Victoria spend a lot of time fighting for causes like climate change, bike paths, who knows what. So is this intended as a slap on the wrist, Johnny?
Well, it's intended perhaps for those who understand what's been going on, to remind the Victoria Council that they've got a governance report, really well done by Myers Norris Penny. But one of the main recommendations of that governance report, which applies to every municipality in the province, I mean, Victoria is not alone, is for municipalities they serve the public best when they stick to their lane. And for too many elected officials, it appears that the seat on the municipal council chamber is really just an excuse to carry a megaphone to the council chamber and opine about all sorts of wonderful stuff. Meanwhile, surrounded by hugely significant public policy issues that are in the lap of municipalities, and whether it's homelessness or the drug crisis, I mean, peace and order, you name it, right? So it's always easier, actually, to debate about what's wrong in far-off Cathay than it is to look out your window and see a tent city.
Always great to hear from the grumpies, the grumpy taxpayers. I love this question in the survival guide. Check it out. Which municipal expenditures are fictitious? In other words, which of these are false? A $6,000 ping pong table. I know that's happening. A musical staircase? Oh, hold it, that's happening. Weed-filled wooden planter sidewalk boxes? Ah, okay. An on-street phone charger using pedal power? Or none of the above? The answer is, I'm afraid, none of these are false. They all happened. These are your hard-earned taxpayer dollars going to work. So this raises the question, how should taxpayer dollars be spent?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, John, because there is a group that have an idea of how they'd like some of that taxpayers' money directed. And Warren Skaalrud has actually taken the time and the big effort to actually put together a petition that went to Ottawa. It had 7,600 names on it, asking for the restoration of the E&N rail line, that 30 or 300 kilometer corridor that goes right up and down Vancouver Island. And Ottawa has been asked to sit down with First Nations, local government, other stakeholders to get this process underway. Now, the petition also calls for $1 billion for new track reparation and also new cars and trains. And well, that's a big ask. So we decided we better get more details on this, and we called up Warren Skaalrud, and let's zoom him in. And now joining us in the Rumble Room for the very first time is Warren Skaalrud from Shawnigan Lake, and great to have you on the program.
Thank you very much, John and Robin. I've been very appreciative of being invited to talk about the railway.
Well, and we've talked about it a few times before, but you apparently are the little engine that could on this little project. You're just an individual. You're not the association. You're an individual who worked on the last petition, which was a year ago. And we can talk about how that went sideways. But you've now taken on a new petition, and it's calling for senior government, starting with the federal government. And of course, then the provincial government has to get involved as well in restoring the rail service on Vancouver Island in a nutshell. And you want to be able to, through reconciliation, get the First Nations on board on this. You're asking for $1 billion, which is twice as much as the last proposal was asking for. And that might be a tough one. We'll want to talk about that. You've had it tabled now. You're hoping to have a response by the 23rd of March to all of this. I mean, at this point, how optimistic are you?
Optimism, I don't know if I'm optimistic that we're going to get the right kind of answer. Mainly, I needed this, I wanted to get this raised on a national level. We're talking about reconciliation with First Nations. I mean, there's 14 First Nations involved here. They actually are part owners of the railway now through the Island Corridor Foundation and the 5 regional districts. So, and they were actually, if you go back and you look at how the Island Corridor Foundation became a thing, it was actually the Cowichan Nation starting to talk to the other nations that talked to the regional districts that created the Island Corridor Foundation in 2003. And then by 2005, they actually obtained the railway from CPR and Rail America that had the Alberni sub. And so, when I dial that back and I think about it, they're obviously interested in bringing back rail, but I'm under certain conditions, right?
I have to say, Robin and I, really great to see that you're keeping this idea in front of the public for all of the reasons you just listed.
Mm-hmm.
This is a huge economy and needs to be updated transportation-wise all across the island.
That's right.
In fact, I was involved with this issue a good 15 years ago. Mayor of Langford and I went to Ottawa, banging on the door of Brian Mulroney. We need money. And so I remember this issue a long time ago. It would be a shame to waste a 300-kilometer corridor, but a 10,000 name petition last year didn't work.
Okay, I want to get back to
First
that
Nation in the news said no. So why do you think government will change its mind now?
There's a lot of public pressure. Like, there's more interest there is in bringing back the railway. It's been tabled in the House of Commons. They have to answer to all of the petition items that are there. So we're going to get a clearer answer back, I hope, from the federal government, but it's on the minds of the federal government. There's a lot more awareness out there now. I've been petitioning now for almost 2 years. And when I started out, there was a lot of people that had been, I'm going to call it brainwashed by the trail folks and other groups to think that, it's not worth it, that it wouldn't be beneficial to the island. And when you've got that kind of public, I call it misinformation out there, you're not going to be able to engender a lot of support for bringing the railway back. So now, I've noticed that there's a significant difference out there now in the number of people that understand just how much this means to the island. If you look at Vancouver, the Metro Vancouver, so that's all of Vancouver, all the way up to Chilliwack, is only 2.6 million people. SkyTrain has been $22 billion. Their most recent extension, which is only 16 kilometers long, is $4 billion to build. So if you look at the per capita investment in investment in infrastructure, we're getting shorted on the island, and we have for decades. Vancouver Island's time is now. It really needs to be, or we really do need some investment before we lose this thing. Because if it's gone, like, you've seen the topography of Vancouver Island, I'm sure. There's no way we're bringing that back without just massive amounts of money. Even building more lanes on our highways is going to cost, multiple times more than what this railway would cost.
Well, we certainly wish Warren and all the folks that are promoting this ENN rail service to come back to Vancouver Island all the best. Now, you and I, John, we've agreed several times that we really think it would be good to bring back the freight service first, because there really is a demand and there's also profit to be made. And I think there really could be a viable rail service with freight on it. And there's, I think, very little question that could work. As for, bringing in commuter trains that would go from the western communities to downtown Victoria, it's been talked a lot about. I think there has to be a lot of political will from the province to make that really happen. So, it's a good idea. As the island grows in population, we could be up to, we're going to be up to over 1 million people by 2030. So, that's a lot of people on the island. Maybe that means in the long run we can have commuter rail and even the longer rail service all the way from Victoria to Courtenay. Who knows? But the $1 billion in the short term, that's going to be a pretty tough ask.
That is a tough ask. That's likely an impossible ask. $1 billion close to an election year where all of these parties want votes. I love trains. I'd love to see them come back. So as the population grows, as you indicated, and we reach 1 bazillion people on Vancouver Island by 2030, not that much, perhaps the demand will be there.
Well, 1 million anyway, 1 million.
Let's go for 1 million instead.
It's a lot of people.
Sometimes when I'm stuck in traffic, it feels like 1 bazillion. However, in the meantime, Warren deserves a lot of credit. Okay, he's trying to keep this flame alive. He's pushing the issue. Look, we wish him the best, and we'll keep a rumble room eye on this issue.
And we'll keep an eye on all the issues, John, as we push forward with this program. And again, want to thank the many people who tune in regularly to watch Victoria Rumble Room. We're up to 1.7 million views, and it's rising all the time. And we're drawing viewers to all sorts of different platforms that we have. I want you to do that lineup again. And I want to take a special mention of going on YouTube. If you go on YouTube, we ask you to subscribe on YouTube. Then you'll get it every week. You'll see it regularly. And that would be a big plus and a big help if you want to watch the Rumble Room. And John, if you can give a little bit more detail about where people can tune in, we'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I will. And as you've now seen on the screen, these links are now going to show up a little differently than usual, a little more in your face. Certainly, we our sort of mothership is Facebook. We are also on X. And as you just indicated, we have a vibrant YouTube inventory, and that's key. Please try to subscribe and try to like the videos that you watch. We also have an audio version of our show on Podbean. There's the link. And we also are on Instagram and TikTok. So we're all over the place. And we also, as it turns out, have a bunch of little clips that we show highlights of our interviews that people love, and they comment a lot. Those are also on all of our platforms. This has been such an interesting show. Thank you. And we're really looking forward to next week when we speak to BC United leader Kevin Falcon. What's going on, Kevin? Can the right in BC get united in time for the next election? We'll ask Kevin. But for now, I'm Yanni Juricic, and with Robin, united we stand.
And divided, well, let's just not get divided, John. Let's not get divided. And that way nobody takes a fall. I'm Robin Adair, and rumble on.